والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنام أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين المعصومين الكرام. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا رسول الله، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة ويا عبرة المؤمنين، غريب مظلوم عطشان شهيد كربلاء، ويا مسلوب العمامة والرداء، ما خاب والله من تمسك بكم، أمن من لجأ إليكم، يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Please bless in this gathering with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala. A second louder salawat in the honor of Abi Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam. My dear loved ones, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It was announced hours ago that over 21 million individuals converged on the holy city of Karbala this year for Ziyarat al-Arbaeen. And that is 3 million more people than the entire population of the country of the Netherlands. And it is double the population of the entire country of Sweden, my dear loved ones. This is a giant amount of individuals, a large, magnanimous amount, millions of people that come to Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam with one mission, with one goal in mind, and that is to renew their covenant with Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. People from all walks of life, all corners of the globe, different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, that they march towards heaven on earth, towards Karbala, towards Al-Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. And this marks truly the largest annual religious pilgrimage on earth. There is nothing like it. It's a miracle, my dear loved ones, when you examine Ziyarat al-Arbaeen from different angles. You see that there is no explanation to this ziyarah other than that it's an emanation of a present day miracle, my dear loved ones. And it's a promise that Allah made with Al-Imam al-Husayn, because he made a promise with God that when he would give everything to Allah, Allah would give him everything in return. Now, before we can examine these miracles that coincide with Ziyarat al-Arbaeen, my dear loved ones, first of all, we have to see the religious benefit and the high maqam of Ziyarat al-Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. We have to see the religious benefit in Ziyarat al-Imam al-Husayn, and that is what we'll examine after a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. First of all, if we look at just the significance of the land of Karbala, of the soil around the dust around the grave of Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, we see that decades prior to Shahadat Al-Imam Al-Hussein, the Prophet made it abundantly clear that this was a special part of the earth. This was not a normal place. And it's recorded in the book Manaqib al-Abi Talib by Ibn Shahrashub, the following narration. That Jibreel alayhi salam, please pay attention, my dear loved ones. This is the majlis of Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It is narrated that Jibreel alayhi salam, he descends one day onto the Prophet with soil, with dust, and he gives him this dust. And he tells him, this is the dust upon which your son Hussein will be martyred. And the Prophet, he takes that dust and he says, Tuba, glad tidings and praise be upon this dust and upon he who which will be martyred upon that dust. In Kitab al-Irshad, al-Shaykh al-Mufid, he narrates a hadith that one day the Prophet, he comes to his wife Salama, and he gives her from that soil. And he tells her, keep the soil safe because this is sacred soil. This soil and this dust is that which is of the land which my son Hussein will be martyred on. And this dust will turn to blood when my son will be martyred. Salama says, I took that dust, I placed it in a vial, I held it with me every day. I did not depart from that vial, and I would take that vial out every day and I would look at it and I would weep because I would remember what Rasulullah told me. And she says that on the day of Ashura, indeed, that dust, it transformed to blood. And that was the day of her azab and the day she wept and wailed for Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. And these ahadith, they indicate that before the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the Prophet, he wanted to make it clear of what would happen. This blessed land, this blessed soil, my dear loved ones. Furthermore, when you look at the lives of all of the ma'soomeen and their teachings, you see that all of the infallibles, they stressed and they emphasized the ziyarah of Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. And if you look at the books of dua, the books of a'mal, such as Misbah al-Mutahajjid, such as Mafatih al-Jinan and other books, you see that in every single month, my dear loved ones, there is a ziyarah of Al-Imam Al-Hussein. In Rajab, in Sha'ban, in Ramadan, during Layali al-Qadr, in Dhul Hijjah, when the pilgrims, the Hujjaj, are in the day of Arafah, they are instructed to perform the ziyarah of Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. And that ziyarah that has great reward, immense reward. During Muharram, during Safar. This is not a coincidence, my dear loved ones. The Ma'soomeen, they wanted to make it clear that this visitation is important. Al-Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he tells his companions, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. He tells his companions, visit Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam and do not forget him. For it is haqq upon Allah, it is a right upon Allah that if an individual who is makroob, who has hem, who has pain, who has stress in his life, in his heart, he goes to the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah, it is haqq upon Allah to grant him his hajat and alleviate that stress and that pain. In another tradition, he tells his companions the ziyarah is equivalent, the reward is equivalent to that of 22 umrahs. He says that the visitor of Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, he who visits Al-Imam Al-Hussein arifan bihaqqih, knowing his maqam, knowing what he sacrificed himself for, And that is something that takes years, maybe, my dear loved ones, for us to truly understand the information and that message and that revolution and what encompassed the story of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, عارفا بحقه. That is not something we should take lightly. But if you go visiting Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, knowing his maqam, Allah would forgive you and absolve you of all of your sins. If you are repentant and you are pure in your intention, obviously, my dear loved ones. And not only this, I want to bring your attention to one of the most incredible riwayat, traditions that's associated with ziyarat al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. It's narrated that one day, Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he is in Najaf, during the time of Abi Ja'far al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi, the end of his khilafah, Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, during the beginning of his khilafah, Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he's in Najaf because he was exiled to a place known as Al-Hira in Iraq, close to Kufa, close to Najaf. Al-Imam al-Sadiq was in Najaf and he was visiting Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So he had installed a campsite there. And he tells one of his companions, I want you to go to the main road, the road in which individuals are coming from Al-Qadisiyah. And I want you to wait until you see a man. When you see a man there, ask him to come with you, for I request his presence. Tell him that the son of the Prophet requests your presence and bring him to me. So the companion says, I went. And I stood at that road. And the heat was severe. At that time, Najaf was not the city you know today. It was probably not inhabited as it is today, for many reasons. Kufa, yes, an ancient city and was inhabited, but not Najaf, my dear loved ones. He says the heat was great. I was standing on that road, that desert road, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting until this companion says, I almost defied my orders and I left and I returned. And then he says, I saw someone approaching. So out of excitement, I went to him and I told him, oh, do you want the honor and the privilege to meet the son of the Prophet? And he says, yes, absolutely. And he says, come with me. So he takes this man to the campsite of Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And they enter the camp. Salamu alaykum, alaykum as-salam. He tells him, where have you come from? And he says, Aqsa al-Yemen, from the furthest point of Yemen. Over 2,000 kilometers, my dear loved ones. And he says, you are from this specific place in Yemen. The Imam tells him, you are from this specific place in Yemen? He says, yes. From this specific village in Yemen? Yes. From this specific area? And he describes exactly where this man is from. So this man, he knows now, this is definitely the Imam. And he tells him, oh, you brother that came from Yemen, what is it that you came for? What brings you here to Iraq? And he says, Jit za'iran lil Hussein alayhi salam. I came from Yemen, over 2,000 kilometers, a journey that would have taken at least weeks, if not months at that time. There was no airplanes and no comfortable ways, methods of transportation at that time. He said, you came all the way from Yemen. The Imam says to him, just to visit Al-Imam al-Hussein? He says, yes. I came just to visit his grave and send my salam upon him and pray 2 rak'ahs beside his grave and go back to my family in Yemen. He says, oh, you brother from Yemen, what is it that you see from this ziyarah? What is it that you see that motivates you to come all this way? And he says, Ya ibn Rasulillah, we see the barakah in our lives. First of all, on a personal level, the barakah in our lives, on our children, on our health. Allah gives barakah in our rizq, in our wealth. It's multiplied. And he says, وَقَضَاء حَوَائِجُنَا. when we go to the grave site of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, Allah, He grants us our hajat. This is what we mentioned last night, my dear loved ones. One of the characteristics of Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is that dua is mustajab under his qubbah. So he tells him, "O you, brother of Yemen, do you want to know more of the reward of this ziyarah?" And he says, "Yes, ya ibn Rasulullah." He says, "Do you know that your ziyarah, the reward of this ziyarah is equivalent to the reward of a pure accepted hajj alongside Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam?" And the man, the riwayah says, فَتَعَجَّبْ. He was astounded. Could this be true? Some people doubt this maybe. Say hajj is wajib. Yes, hajj is wajib. And you have to go on hajj. But sometimes there are mustahabbat that have more reward than wajibat. Like what? When you begin with salam, it's mustahab, right? It's not wajib. But it has more reward than when you answer salam. Answering salam is wajib. He says that this ziyarah is equivalent to the reward of a pure accepted hajj alongside the Prophet. And he says not only one but two hajj. Not only two but three. And the Imam goes on until he says this ziyarah of yours, the reward is equivalent to 30 pure accepted hajj alongside the Prophet of Allah. This is to remind us, my dear loved ones, of the great and immense reward and blessing of the ziyarah of Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Furthermore, my dear loved ones, specifically the ziyarah of Arbaeen, it's been outlined as one of the characteristics of a mu'min. A narration attributed to Al-Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. My dear loved ones, a louder, more honorable salawat. Allahumma salli ala. Our 11th Imam, he says, Alamatil mu'mini khams. The signs of a mu'min are 5. First of all, Salat ihda wa khamseen. The prayer of 51 rak'ahs. The wajibat and the nawafil, they equal 51 rak'ahs. Wa ta'fir al-jabeen. And that you rub your forehead on the soil when you pray. Meaning that you pray on soil, on dust. Some people say, you Shia, you lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, you engage in shirk. You pray on this dust, it's shirk. But you'd have to ask, my dear loved ones, what was the sunnah of the Prophet himself? What did he pray on? If you look to the traditions in Sahih Bukhari, you find that the Prophet always prayed on dust. In fact, you find narrations from his companions that indicate there was a day that there was a great storm in Medina and great rain in Medina. And the mosque of the Holy Prophet at that time had no roof. It was 4 walls and it was dust. So his companions asked him while they were walking in the mud, and it was inconvenient and it was tough to pray there. They asked him, "O Rasulullah, can we place some cloth or some barrier between us and the dust and the mud that we pray on?" And the Prophet said, "No, you pray on the dust." And that companion says, when the Prophet was leaving, I saw that he had dust and mud on his forehead. This is the sunnah of the Prophet. Not to pray on carpet or vinyl or what have you. In any case, that is a second characteristic of a mu'min. وَتَعْفِيرُ الْجَبِينَ وَالْجَهْرُ بِبِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. Announcing loudly, enunciating the basmala during your salah. During our salah, we have 2 kinds of prayers. Jahr and ikhfat, the way that we recite the prayers. those of which that we recite silently, like which prayers? Like which prayers? Dhuhr and Asr. Ahsantum. And those that we recite, ikhfat. Ikhfat is when we lower our voices in the recitation. And those that we recite loudly, jahr, which are Maghrib, Isha, and Subuh. Obviously, if you pray in Jama'ah, you have to pray with a low voice in any of those salahs. Some people, they raise their voice in Salat al-Jama'ah. Only the Imam should raise his voice in Salat al-Jama'ah. In any case, the Basmala is mustahab to recite loudly when you pray Furada, even in the prayers that demand the Jahr, that you don't enunciate the prayers loudly. It's still mustahab to enunciate the Basmala. Fourth, وَاتَّخَذْتُمْ بِالْيَمِينِ, that you wear a ring in your right ring finger. Either aqiq, there are many traditions. And finally, وَزِيَارَةَ الْأَرْبَعِينَ, Ziyarat al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Arbaeen is one of the 5 signs of a true mu'min, a true believer. So you see that this ziyarah is elevated, my dear loved ones. It's elevated alongside our daily prayers, alongside other mustahabbat. It becomes a sign of a mu'min, a true believer, those that walk and they march. And they announce to the world that we've come to stand with justice. We've come to renew our covenant with Abi Abdullah, Abul Ahrar, the father of all those who are liberated, the teacher of all those who love liberty and justice, my dear loved ones. To stand at his shrine and to announce, Labbayka ya Hussein. That is one of the signs of a true mu'min, my dear loved ones. And that is exactly why this ziyarah became targeted by the tyrants across history. Because that ziyarah was a realignment of all free men and all free women, that when we stand behind Hussein and under the banner of Hussein, we stand with justice against injustice. So all tyrants across history, they tried to eradicate the ziyarah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. After the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura, a new war began. And that was a war to eradicate his memory and to rewrite the narrative. And that's why you see so much fabrication is in the books of those that follow Madrasat al-Khulafa. So much fabrication and censorship occurred in those traditions and those books. Because they tried to rewrite the narrative. To say that Abi Abdullah was someone who stood against the Khalifa of his time. And you all know the story. But those that know the truth, they stood valiantly, defiantly. During the time of Bani Umayyah, Bani al-Abbas, may Allah's curse be upon them. It was a ziyarah that was done in secrecy, my dear loved ones. And it was a death sentence if you were caught on that ziyarah. And in fact, my dear loved ones, during that time, even until the time of Bani al-Abbas, later into the reign of Bani al-Abbas, the grave sites of Amir al-Mu'mineen and al-Imam al-Hussein were secret. Their locations were not known by the public, only by the khawas, the very close companions of the Ahlul Bayt. And one day, one of the companions of Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he's asked, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why is it that we have not known the location of our Imams, the location of their grave sites until today? And he explains it was out of defense that the Bani al-Abbas and Bani Umayyah, they would desecrate those graves. Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, do you know that he desecrated and dug up over 3,000 graves in Najaf during his reign? So that he could stumble, in hopes to stumble upon the remains of the body of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, to desecrate that. And that's why that grave was left a secret during that time. But Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, after the decline of Bani Umayyah, he instructed his companions and he taught them the site of the grave of Al-Imam al-Hussein. And he told them that you must go to the ziyarah even if your life is in danger. This ziyarah, it demands that you go and visit Abi Abdullah. This grave and this location and this tomb is special. Even if your life is at risk, you go and you make that ziyarah. During the time of Mutawakkil al-Abbasi, a harsh time for the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt. Do you know that Al-Mutawakkil, he sent his men and his armies to Karbala, and he sent ox to plow the land of Karbala in hopes that he would desecrate the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada? He tried to flood that place. Not only that, he sent his armies to encircle the city of Karbala with a kill on sight order. You find the Za'ir, you kill them, you execute them. Did that succeed? Did that succeed, my dear loved ones? Answer me. Who is alive today? Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam or his enemies? Who's alive? Answer me. In recent history, my dear loved ones, we don't have to go back centuries. Just a few decades ago, you saw the evil of the Ba'ath regime and how they would try and persecute and eliminate anyone who was caught walking towards Karbala. And they had demands that they would go and block off every single road from every province across Iraq. There was patrols, my dear loved ones, of the security apparatus of that evil regime to go and take those zuwar and execute them and torture them. One year, many of the scholars of the Hawza, they marched from Najaf to Karbala, and many thousands of individuals marched with them, and they were taken prisoner, and they were executed. And there were mass graves on that road that is lined with shuhada. This road that we should not take lightly, my dear loved ones. This road that is lined with sacrifice and with challenge. And until the end of time, tyrants will try to stop that ziyarah. And they will try to eliminate the remembrance of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, but it will never succeed, my dear loved ones. Because you see today, those 21 million that defy all logic. When you look at countries with so much wealth, so much power, they could not organize an event of this magnitude even if they put together all of their resources and all of their planning. There's no country that can hold this kind of honor and walk and march, my dear loved ones. This honor and this defiance, my dear loved ones, and this understanding of the zuwar of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein and the lovers of Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam comes from his honor and his dignity and his karama and izzah on the day of Ashura. When you see that Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, he stood and he was undeterred. He was alone, yet he was strong. Some people say today, us, the Shia, we're a small, weak, tiny minority. We're weak. We should be scared. This is not true. We are a small minority, but we're not a weak minority. Because we belong to the school that taught us that when you stand in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah elevates you. Allah gives you karama and izzah. We learn from Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam that on the day of Ashura, when he looked in front of the enemies, those 70,000 men, an ocean of enemy soldiers in front of him, and they tell him, Hussein, give bay'ah, give bay'ah, and he says, Wallah la u'tikum biyadi i'ta' al-dhalil, wa la uqirru lakum iqrar al-abid. And he tells his brother Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, when he tells him, Hussein, change your mind, take a different path, don't go to Iraq. He says, Wallah, Muhammad, Wallah, my brother, if there was no sanctuary in this entire dunya, I would never give bay'ah to Yazid. This was Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba al-Ahrar. This is what he stood for. And that's why you see that the ziyarah of his is a miracle. It defies all logic, my dear loved ones. When you belong to that school, when you understand that your karama is derived from Allah, what did our beloved reciter today, he recited in the Holy Quran, if you guys were paying attention. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا. What did he recite? Who was paying attention? وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا Bani Adam. Indeed, we have given dignity to the son of Adam. And we've dignified the son of Adam over a lot of our creation. But only when you understand that the source of your dignity and your honor is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people, they look for honor and dignity through wealth, through fame, through fortune, through power. Look at individuals with so much fame, celebrities. They are some of the most lonely individuals. They have wealth, but they derive their honor from the wrong source, my dear loved ones. So far, my dear loved ones, we have analyzed different parts of Ziyarat al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Its great benefit, the miracle of its survival, and the fact that it would never be eradicated by anyone who tries, no matter how powerful. But now I want you for a moment, although the topic is emotional and we love Abi Abdullah, and those emotions in your heart, they're a sign that you're a mu'min. When you're emotional for the story of Abi Abdullah, it's a sign that you're a mu'min. But for one moment, I want you to remove the spiritual lenses and adopt the lens of an economist or an engineer or a city planner. Why? Because only then you're able to see that truly the ziyarah is a miracle, my dear loved ones. First of all, please pay attention, my dear loved ones. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. First of all, if we look at the setting of where the ziyarah takes place, you look at Iraq, and you look at the trials and tribulations and the turbulence this country has gone through, many years of war, many years of sanctions, many years of economic instability. And you see that the country of Iraq, their wealth is a fraction, a tiny fraction, that of wealthy countries that usually hold large events, global events. And not only that, it's a tiny fraction of its wealthy neighbors as well. Furthermore, if you look at the city of Karbala itself, a city of just under 1 million residents, and you look at the infrastructure of the city, the roads, you all know, you've all been there, and you see the roads, and you see the lack of electricity, and you see the lack of water, the lack of resources and utilities that have to be rationed properly for its own residents. And then you wonder, how is it 21 million individuals or more, they converge on this city? Everyone is fed, everyone has a place to stay, there are no crimes committed, everyone is safe. Imagine that you take 21 million people and you put them in Washington, D.C. Because Karbala is a small city, the same size as Washington, D.C. 21 million people. Washington, D.C. has just about 700,000 residents. And you try to keep everyone safe. Do you see that recently the National Guard was dispatched to keep it safe from mayhem? 21 million people in that small area, and there's no need for police. There's no need to keep people safe because they're being kept safe by Allah, being kept safe by Abi Abdullah, by Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, because they're the lovers of Hussein. Secondly, my dear loved ones, if we make a very conservative estimate of the resources that are put forth for food and water, I want you to make some calculations right now, my dear loved ones. If we estimate that the bottle of water in Iraq costs about 40 cents, and that each Zair is given 4 bottles of water a day, over 10 days, and there's 21 million Zuwar, I want you to calculate how much that costs. I'll tell you. Over $336 million. And this is just water. And you all know, you've been to ziyarah, and you know it's more than water. And absolutely, just if you look at water, it's more than 4 bottles a day. But let's make a conservative estimate. $336 million. If you look at food, and you estimate that a simple meal in Iraq costs $5. And those zuwar, they get 3 meals a day. And you all know it's more than 3 meals a day. But let's say they get 3 meals a day. For 10 days, 21 million individuals. $5 a meal. That's almost $3.2 billion spent on food. You've all seen the food that is given in the ziyarah. It's not $5 meals. It's the best meat and the best fish and the best ingredients and the best spices, and it's not 3 meals only. Those mawakib that give everything, they save everything for the entire year just to provide for the zuwar. Those that have gone, they can attest to this. And you can watch the videos and you can see for yourself. It's all documented. In total, this is almost $3.7 billion given in just 10 days. And this is a conservative estimate. And I'll tell you, my humble opinion is that it's almost over $10 billion that's spent. Because when you look at the resources that are put forth, those zuwar and those mawakib are not just given food and water. They're given a place to stay, a place to sleep, a place to bathe. They're given gifts before they leave. Because those mawakib, they know khidmat al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, greatest honor and greatest blessing in their lives. There was a report on the Iraqi national TV that spoke to a man. They interviewed him. And they told him, how did you come up with the funds for your mawkib? And he said, you know, I'm a newlywed. And he was a young man. You can go and Google this. He says, I'm a newlywed. I don't have a job. But when I saw everyone putting together their mawkib, I was motivated. So I took some of the belongings that I got as a gift for my wedding, and I went and sold them. And I made this mawkib, this humble mawkib. He saved everything he had just to offer that mawkib. And Allah gave him in return and multiplied that blessing. My dear loved ones, when you look at just the logistics of those who march and walk to Karbala, you see that individuals walk 600 kilometers or more from Kuwait. They walk to Karbala over 21 days in sweltering heat. You all know the average heat in Iraq, over 50 Celsius, maybe 118, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. They walk over 21 days to reach Karbala. Are they athletes? Are they all young? No, in fact, some of them are old, very old, over 70 or 80 years old. They have health conditions. One of the most grueling and demanding athletic competitions, my dear loved ones, is held every year in Death Valley, a 135-mile race. And the athletes that prepare for this, they spend 5 to 10 years in preparation. They spend tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment, on training, on the best coaches, the best nutrition plans. They train in climate-controlled environments. And at the end of it, many of them, they don't succeed in finishing that 135-mile trek. And I ask you, my dear loved ones, how is it that a woman like Mizhir, go and look up the story of Mizhir, a woman who over 100 years old, she would walk from Mendali, the border of Iraq and Iran, over 250 kilometers in the summer to Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. And there was an interview they did with her son. They asked him, Mizhir, tell us about your mom and her commitment to this walk. He says, listen, my mom is committed to this walk. She'll never let it go until she dies. And in fact, one year I took her to Baghdad to have some medical appointments, and the doctor told her, Mizhir, this year you can't go on the walk. Your son can take you in a car, but you can't walk, because she had some health conditions. Mizhir says in the interview, days before the Mawakib started to leave towards Karbala, I saw that my mother was sewing her alam to that stick that she would hold, and she would carry on her back and walk with the Mawakib towards Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And I told her, mother, the doctor told you this year there's no walking. I'll drive you. A few meters before Karbala, you walk. There's no way you can reach the shrine with a car anyways. You have to walk a few hours. And she says, Mizhir, don't get involved. I have a covenant with my master. Mizhir says in that interview, my mother went. She performed the walk. She went on ziyarah. She came back. I took her to Baghdad to the doctor, and the doctor said, Mizhir, where did your mother go? What did you guys do? Where did you take your mother? He says, what happened? He says, Mizhir, your mother, she's doing better than when she came here. And I ask you, my dear loved ones, isn't that something that defies logic to the point? If you truly believe, you'll see that this is a mu'jizah to Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. And this is the oath that Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, she made clear to Imam Zayn al-Abidin on the 13th of Muharram when they're leaving Karbala. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he sees the bodies of his father, his companions, his loved ones, his family members. As Sayyidah Zainab in the narration, she says, it was as if I saw his soul was about to leave his body. He was going to die from that pain. So I told him, oh Maulana, oh Zayn al-Abidin, I heard your grandfather Rasulullah tell our father Amir al-Mu'mineen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it a covenant that this place will always be a mazar. There will be an alam in this place that millions will flock to this place year after year. And the fara'ina, the tyrants and the pharaohs of history, they will try to eliminate this ziyarah, but they never will be able to. They never will be able to. That is why As-Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, that is why when Ibn Marjana, he tells her, how did you see what happened on the day of Ashura? She says, Ma ra'ayt illa jamila. Because she knows after that incredible martyrdom, that shahada, there are 21 million pilgrims that will walk. When she says, لن تميت وحينا ولن تمحو ذكرنا. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he says, oh aunt, أنت عالمة غير معلمة. This is a sign. The Imam, the Ma'soom is saying, your words, they will perpetuate until the end of time. This ziyarah is a miracle. This ziyarah, my dear loved ones, is something that we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada, in the name of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, that inshallah, all of us, next year we will be on the path to Jannah, the path to Karbala, the path to Sayyid al-Shuhada during these days, during this time, my dear loved ones. And this is exactly why Sheikh Ja'far al-Tustari, that we mentioned last night in his book, he says that Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he says, An-Nabi wa ahlu baytih kulluhum sufunun najat. Please listen to this. Ayatollah Sheikh Ja'far al-Tustari, one of the fuqaha, one of the pillars of tashayyu', he says, the Prophet and his household, كلهم سفن النجاة ولكن سفينة الحسين أوسع وأسرع. The Prophet and his progeny, they are all the arks of salvation. However, the ark of Abi Abdullah, it is the fastest on the seas and on the oceans and on the storms and the largest in occupancy. When you see that a leader of a tribe in Iraq, Sheikh Ashira, a man that has 30,000, 40,000 individuals under his command, he sits on the ground during the ziyarah and he massages feet. When you see that a businesswoman, a wealthy businesswoman, that in most days you can't talk to her, you can't speak to her because she's pompous. She has wealth. During the ziyarah, she has a mawkib, and she begs the zuwar, bring your shoes and bring your sandals. I want to clean them. I want to polish them. Al-Imam al-Husseini changes us. A person that for 10 years, 20 years, they listen to music every day. They make sins every day, whatever it may be. But every year, those 10 days of Muharram, I want to make my hijab better as a young woman. I want to stop listening to music as a young man. I want to come to the masjid. People that you don't see all year, they come to the masjid. Because Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam and his tragedy. And that is why his ship is the largest and the fastest towards Allah. He is the greatest wasila towards Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to understand that this wasila is not exclusive to only 10 days, and that we learn to implement all of those lessons in our entire life. Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he's asked by one of his companions, my dear loved ones, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I want you to tell me what was the most challenging part of that journey. Was it when you were in Karbala? Was it when you saw what happened to your father and your uncle and your brothers? Ya ibn Rasulullah, was it when you were being marched towards Kufa? Was it when you were in Sham? Was it when you were on your way back to Medina? Tell me, Ibn Rasulullah, what was the most painful time for you? Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he tells this companion, oh dear loved one, and he says 3 times, the Imam, as he sheds his tears, he says the most painful place was Sham, was Sham, was Sham. If you saw what they did to us in Sham and the pain and suffering that my aunt Zainab and the orphans of Al-Imam Al-Hussein, they went through in that city, that cursed city. During those moments, during those days, it was such a cursed city. Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he says, the thing that brought most pain to my heart was that I saw the daughters of Rasulullah sleeping in a kharaba in Sham, sleeping in a home with no ceiling, with no roof, a decrepit building that had fallen over, and they were sleeping on the floor and on the dirt. It's mentioned that the wife of Yazid, may Allah's curse be upon him, Hind, she goes to Yazid after Ashura and she tells him, "Oh Amir, I want you to take me to see those captives everyone's talking about. I want to see those prisoners of war, of this great victory that you've had." He tells her, "Of course, but first you must wear your best clothes and your best gown and your best jewels." And he says, "We will have a large parade and a large procession, and we will go to see them." They come to see the daughters of Rasulullah sitting on the floor. Hind bint Abdullah, she goes in, being paraded, raised on a throne embellished with diamonds and jewels, while the daughters of Muhammad sit on the floor of that kharaba. Allahu Akbar. It's as if in those moments I see Sayyida Zainab being reminded of one of the most beautiful moments preceding the day of Ashura. Moments when she saw her brother Hussein and Abu al-Fadl before the day of Ashura. Al-Imam al-Hussein, he dispatches Abu al-Fadl to go to the enemy camp to communicate with them. As Sayyida Zainab, she notices Abu al-Fadl is gone, so she tells Al-Imam al-Hussein, "Where is my beloved Abu al-Fadl? Where is my guardian Abbas? Don't trust them, Hussein. Don't send him to the enemy camp. Please bring him back to safety." Al-Imam al-Hussein, he rides on his horseback. Abu al-Fadl is returning. Abu al-Fadl, when he sees his brother, he disembarks his horse out of respect to Abi Abdullah. 36 years, O mu'mineen, he never said, "Oh Hussein," he always said, "Sayyidi," until he fell on the plains of Karbala. When she sees them coming back in safety, she sees the sun and the moon, she sees her brothers, and she calls out, "Alif marhaba bdhal al-mijiblin. عباس هذا وذاك الحسين الحسين والله الحسين يراعون عن خدر النساوين." As-Sayyida Zainab, she's sitting there in the kharaba of Sham, reminded of her brothers that were not there. And then she hears that these individuals are talking Arabic, perfect Arabic. She says, "Are you Arabs? Are you Muslimin?" As-Sayyida Zainab says, "We are the masters of the Arabs. We are the ones who taught Islam." She says to her, "Oh Sayyidati, where is it that you come from?" She says, "We come from Al-Madinah." And she disembarks her throne. She sits down on the ground with the daughters of Muhammad. As-Sayyida Zainab, she says, "Why is it that you sit on the dirt with us?" She says, "Out of respect, because you come from the city of Rasulullah." My dear loved ones, Hind, she was a servant in the home of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Medina. She was a servant of a Sayyida Zainab, of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So she says to her, Oh Sayyidati, I want to ask you, I was a servant in a home in Medina, and I want to ask you of the people of that home. She says, who do you ask of? She tells her, I ask you of my master, Abul Fadl. I ask you of my master Hussein. I ask you of my lady Zainab, my lady Kulthum. In those moments, as Sayyidah Zainab, she explodes in tears. She says, you have broken our heart. You ask me of Kulthum. This is Kulthum in front of you. Look how she's been changed. You ask me of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. I left him on the Alqami with his severed palms. You ask me of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Look at that head on that spear reciting Quran. That's the head of my beloved Hussein. She says, and you ask me of Zainab. I am Zainab. In those moments, and she rushes towards the palace of Yazid, may Allah's curse be on him. She tells him, what have you done? You've killed the grandson of Muhammad. May our head never share a pillow. I am no longer your wife. And she sat in that kharaba with a Sayyidah Zainab. Allahu Akbar. ولكن الأمر لله وإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. My dear loved ones, let us raise our hands in dua. These are some of the final nights of our aza. We don't know if we will be here next year to mourn Abi Abdullah al-Hussein. Oh Allah, we ask you in the names of those that you love the most. We beg you in their names, in the name of Fatima and her father, and her husband and her two sons. Oh Allah, we ask you to not allow us to leave this Husayniyah without granting us our hajat. Oh Allah, we ask you in the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada to protect our youth. Oh Allah, we ask you in the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada, all those who are ill and sick, fighting mental illnesses, diabetes, cancer, illnesses with no cure, we ask you to give them complete shifa and recovery. Oh Allah, we ask you in the name of Sayyid al-Shuhada to grant us until our final breaths and until we are on our deathbeds the servitude and the khidmah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء نهدي ثواب سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على